Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Chop It Up Sports. As always, I'm your host Carter Stedman, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Chop It Up. We're going to be talking some college football today. We had some crazy top 25 matchups, and at the end of the episode, I'm going to share my thoughts on the NFL Primetime games this weekend. What a weird week in college football. We'll start there. We had 3 top 25 matchups: USC at Michigan, Tennessee at Oklahoma State, and Utah at Oklahoma State. Tennessee at Oklahoma, Utah at Oklahoma State. And the common theme of this week was find a way to win, even if it's ugly. And we'll get into this in all these games. But just a strange week. I think when we looked at these matchups originally, we were expecting a lot of fireworks, a lot of scoring. And that's not necessarily what we got. We got some ugly football. We had a lot of turnovers. Some young quarterback play definitely played a role in that. But just a kind of strange week. We had teams that performed well, and we had some teams that didn't. And even late last night, for you people on the West Coast that might have stayed tuned in to the After Dark games, we had some wild stuff going on. And we're going to get into that when we get into the red light, green light segment of our show. But let's first dive into our games, as we always do. First up on the slate was USC Michigan. As I talked about in my predictions earlier this week, I thought USC was going to run away with this one. I felt like their offense was too potent. Miller Moss had been outstanding so far this season, and Lincoln Riley always finds a way for his offense to be right where they need to be in big games. That was not the case this weekend. It was really, it wasn't a great showing for USC in the second half. They did find their groove a little bit, but overall it just felt like they never really had that chemistry going. I don't know if that's because it was, their first true road game. I know they played LSU in Vegas, but that's, pretty close to home in comparison to where LSU is. So maybe it was that. Maybe it was just this Michigan defense was stifling them, and credit to Wink Martindale if that's actually the case. But this game was just kind of weird. If you look at the first half, Michigan had a lot of success running the ball, which is what we've been waiting for from this Michigan offense. As we know, it was Alex Orji's first start. He doesn't have a strong arm, but he can run the ball well, and that's what you get when you put a guy like that in this system, is he opens up the run game even more because he's a threat himself on the legs. And we saw that in the first half. They had a lot of creative different runs. Kaleo Mullings had a 50-yard touchdown run. Orji was doing some stuff on his legs, paws, and it just looked like they had control of the game. They were running the ball the way they wanted to. Donovan Edwards was running the ball well, and especially without Colston Loveland, their star tight end, you knew that Michigan wasn't going to be airing it out a lot this game, and they didn't. And in the first half, they looked completely fine. They went into the half 14-3. They limited their mistakes. USC couldn't get anything going down the field. Miller Moss, even if he wasn't getting sacked, he was getting hit after throws. He couldn't find rhythm. He was off-footing. And it just looked like USC was in a lot of trouble coming into the second half. But as we saw, USC picked up their momentum drastically. Their first possession of the second half, they were able to drive down and go put it in the end zone. And here's the thing about USC. When they find their rhythm and Miller Moss is finding his guys and Lincoln Riley's able to utilize his whole playbook from top to bottom, they're a dangerous team. So you have to be able to limit how much plays they can use. You have to be able to get them in these second and long, third and long situations where you can kind of expect what they're going to be running in a passing situation rather than second and short where they're able to either run the ball or take a shot downfield. You have to be able to limit those type of high-risk, high-reward plays from USC. But ultimately, it was all USC in the second half. I wouldn't say they dominated necessarily because the game was still relatively close, but it did feel like USC was in complete control for 28 to 29 minutes of the second half. But ultimately, Michigan finds a way to win. When you look at the stats here a little bit, Michigan outscores USC 21-6 before the last drive of the game for the Wolverines. The only real mistake I saw from USC in the second half was the pick six, and that really ended up being the difference maker. USC down 3, looking to go down and take the lead, and Miller Moss, I don't know if he misses this guy or what, if it was just miscommunication, but nevertheless, Will Johnson, the star defensive back for the Wolverines, makes a great play. He jumps the route, and he takes that pick to the house. And that gives Michigan a little bit of life and a little bit of hope. And you kind of felt that. The offense had been super stagnant in the second half. USC had made some adjustments to kind of figure out what Michigan was going to be doing with their offensive scheme. And so for Will Johnson to put some points on the board, even though they missed the extra point, which is pretty much Michigan's season in a nutshell so far, it really felt like they gave them a life and it kept them in the game. And ultimately, when you look at the score, that was the difference in the game, is that the pick six thrown by Miller Moss just, it gave Michigan a little bit of life. It kept them around. Whereas if USC was able to go down there and put some points on the board, maybe we're talking about how USC picked up a massive road win, and that's not what happened. I want to get into this Michigan drive real quick at the end of the game because it was exactly what you expect from Michigan football. And it was just so strange to me that the entire game, really, especially the second half, they hadn't figured out anything else. Orji couldn't throw the ball downfield to save his life. The run game was getting stifled. Donovan Edwards had a fumble inside their own 25-yard line that set up USC to put some points on the board. But nevertheless, somehow, some way, Michigan finds himself only down 4 with 5 minutes to play. So you have a ton of time. They had their timeouts. And they run 10 plays, 4-minute and 30-second drive, whatever it was. 8 out of their 10 plays were runs, and they were all between the tackles. I was listening to the broadcast yesterday, and they talk about how, back in the 70s and 80s, whatever it was, 89% of plays were run in between the tackles. Now in college football, I don't know the number exactly. That has to be down to like 20 to 25% maybe. Just because teams are airing it out, they're getting creative with their runs, a lot of outside scheming runs, not necessarily we're going to run it in between our linemen and we're going to do it and you're not going to be able to stop it. But Michigan found a way to do that. And really the big play was the Khalil Mullins run for whatever it was, 50, 60 yards to take them down inside the red zone. And that set them up well. But even then, they get to 4th and 1 at the 1-yard line. They have to score a touchdown. And everyone in the stadium knows what's going on. And this is what I love about college football is that Michigan knows they're going to hand the ball off. USC knows they're going to hand the ball off. Every person in the stadium knows exactly what Michigan is doing. They're going to turn around. Alex Orji is going to hand the ball off to Khalil Mullins, and they're either going to score or they're not. And they found a way. Michigan had a great blocking on that play. If you look at the tight ends and how they were able to hold their blocks just long enough for Khalil Mullins to get in there. And he found the end zone, and that gave Michigan the win. And to me, I was getting ready when I was taking notes, just preparing to talk about how, USC was just too much in the second half. Michigan's defense is getting tired. We saw this before in the Texas game. And all of a sudden, you look up after the game, and you're like, how did Michigan win that? It looked like USC was in control for all 30 minutes of the second half, and somehow Michigan gets the win. And oddly enough, it was the big plays for Michigan that gave them the win. When you look at them offensively, not a lot going on. I think they had like 15 total yards before that last possession. But you have the Khalil Mullins touchdown run in the first half to put him on the board. Donovan Edwards ripped off another 50-plus yard run. And then obviously Mullins' big run and touchdown at the end of the game to give Michigan the lead. But I was trying to figure out a topic to this game. A lot of times college football is similar in the sense that each game have a lot of common themes and just like overarching points. But this game was just ugly, and I think that is maybe just how it has to be for Michigan. I think they have to make games ugly. They have to turn teams over. They have to rely on their defense to make plays and even put points on the board like we saw last night. And I just think with this brand of Michigan football and as their offense, tries to find some sort of rhythm under Alex Orji as it looks like he's going to be the starter going forward, I just think they have to make games nasty. They got to play smash mouth football. The other team's defense is probably going to know that they're going to have to stop the run. And if they do, they'll probably be able to beat Michigan. But if they don't, it's going to be a result like we saw yesterday in the Big House. So credit to Michigan. It was an ugly win. It was gross. I really felt like USC was maybe the more deserving team. But it's not always about who's the most deserving. It's about who puts up more points than the other team. And yesterday, that was Michigan. So credit to them. We've had them on our red light segment a lot. And fortunately, they find themselves in the green here with a win in Big Ten play. Let's move on to this next game, Primetime yesterday. Tennessee and Oklahoma in Norman. It was Josh Heupel's return to Norman as the national championship winning quarterback for the Sooners back in his playing days. This time it was a little bit different, though. He comes back as the head coach of Tennessee. And I talked about this earlier. I had a feeling this game was going to be a little ugly just because of the fact that both quarterbacks are young. It's their first real primetime game. Nico Iamaleava, it's his true first road game as a starter of Tennessee. And even though I think Jackson Arnold is a really talented quarterback, yesterday we saw him get pretty rattled and he ends up getting benched. We'll get into that here in a second. But just kind of a slugfest, similar to USC Michigan, where the defenses are just trading blows back and forth, a couple turnovers. There's one segment in the game where Tennessee fumbles, Nico Iamaleava gets strip sacked, Oklahoma picks it up at like the 4-yard line, and then the very next play, Jackson Arnold fumbles a designed quarterback run. And that was just kind of the theme of this game. Oklahoma had some chances, because of Tennessee's mistakes, but ultimately Tennessee made few enough mistakes to get out of Norman with a win. And listen, in college football, sometimes that is all that matters. These are young kids. They're 18 to 22-year-olds. Unless you're Utah and your quarterback is 35, it's not going to be perfect football. It usually never is. And that's what we have to enjoy about this sport so much, is that it's never going to be perfectly clean football. There's going to be turnovers. There's going to be mistakes. And so a lot of times it's just about finding ways to win. And ultimately, that was Tennessee yesterday. When I was watching this game, and especially if you go look at the box score, Nico's stats don't necessarily jump out to you. He had 194 yards and a touchdown, but he just looked very comfortable in his system yesterday. And Heupel does a great job of putting him in a situation where he can be successful. He had the deep post to his receiver Thornton yesterday for the touchdown, and he just looks smooth in there. He looks comfortable. He looks like he's found his place, and that's what you want to see from a young quarterback. Yes, he had a chance to sit out last year and learn a lot, but this is his first time really playing true, meaningful snaps. And so for him to go into a hostile environment like Oklahoma and just control the game in a way, yes, he didn't throw all over the field and for 14 touchdowns, but he controlled the game. He made the plays he needed to. And to me, that's almost as impressive as if he were to put up major stat lines on this game. But I really want to get into this Tennessee defense. I feel like this was the focal point of the game for Tennessee. And this is the thing with Josh Heupel. When you look at his tenure so far with the Volunteers, it's been a lot about offense. It was the Hendon Hooker offense, and then it came to Joe Milton and how far he could throw it. Now they have Nico Iamaleava. So yes, they have an exciting quarterback room, and they've had some exciting offenses, but Josh Heupel has been waiting to get his defensive scheme implemented into Tennessee, get his guys in there, and show that Tennessee can rely on a powerhouse defense. And that's what we've been seeing this season. And to me, that's what makes this Tennessee team different than the teams we've seen in years past. They held Oklahoma to just over 200 yards. Oklahoma was 3 of 15 on third down. Definitely not ideal. And so I think when you look at Tennessee, a lot of people are asking, can they be a real contender? Can they knock off the Georgias, the Alabamas? And when you look at it, in years past, the reason they really haven't been able to win those games, I feel like, is because their defense gives up so much points to the point where if the offense isn't scoring every possession, then they're at risk to not win. And I don't feel like that's the case this year. I think they can get away with Nico having a mediocre performance like he did last night and still getting a win over a top 15, top 20 team. Obviously, as we get into SEC play, he's going to need to be better than that. And I do expect him to improve as the year goes on. He's shown that he can win the big game now, and he's going to need to show that a multitude of more times throughout the course of this season. I want to focus on Oklahoma here for a second. I was really disappointed in their performance. They're at home. Game day was there. A lot of hype on campus. And it just was a really poor performance. The score probably says it was closer even than it really was. I just felt like it was Tennessee from start to finish. But Jackson Arnold, this is his first year starting, a lot of hype around this guy as well, and he just didn't it looked like the moment was almost just too big for him. I mentioned he had the fumble inside the 5-yard line. He had some other just nasty turnovers. I think they had a backwards pass that was dropped and got recovered by Tennessee, and he was just struggling to find his guys. He ends up getting benched for Michael Hawkins Jr., and it didn't really change the course of the game much. Oklahoma still really couldn't get anything going. Hawkins ended up actually leading Oklahoma in rushing with 22 yards. So that tells you the lack of power this offense had yesterday for the Sooners. There was no Boomer Sooner going on yesterday. It was all balls. And so if I'm Oklahoma, I'm looking at my schedule, and I went and took a look at this last night, and I was like, oh, it could get really bad really fast for Sooner fans. I'm going to read it off here. They have a couple games in between, but these are the biggest games remaining on Oklahoma's schedule. They had the Red River rivalry against Texas. Obviously, that's a neutral site. They go to Ole Miss, to Missouri. They get Alabama at home. And their final game of the season, they go on the road to Death Valley to take on LSU. I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking maybe 2 wins, maybe 3, but probably not. Based on what I saw yesterday with the quarterback play, I just am not impressed. And I think when you go up against these defenses, Texas, top team in the country, Ole Miss, defenses bend, don't break. Missouri, they got in a close one yesterday with Vanderbilt. I think they're going to be okay. That's not an easy place to play. Alabama at home, especially if Bama beats Georgia next week, watch out for the Tide. I don't just see a way where Oklahoma can beat Alabama, but who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. And then nevertheless, you have to go to Death Valley. LSU's looked good, not great in my opinion, but Death Valley is not an easy place to play. LSU is going to be getting up for that one. It's their senior night as well. So if I'm Oklahoma, it's my first year in the SEC. I'm looking at it. I had my first big game. Former national championship winning coach is coming back. He's coaching the other team. I'm hyped up. And we get smacked. That's not something I'm excited about if I'm a Sooners fan. I'm looking at the schedule and I'm saying to myself, this year might go downhill really fast. So just something to look out for this year as Oklahoma tries to hover around the top 20 to top 25 range. We'll see what happens with this season, and I'm sure we'll come back to them at some point throughout the year. We're going to dive into our last game here. Utah and Oklahoma State. It was a Big 12 matchup. Number 12 Utah, number 14 Oklahoma State. Probably the two front runners right now for the Big 12 championship, especially after Kansas State's performance last night, which, side note, was really weird. I turned on the game at like 11:30, and all of a sudden Kansas State's down 25 points to BYU. Pretty interesting there. I'll have to talk about that later in the week. But let's focus on this game. Utah comes in playing Oklahoma State in Stillwater. People were expecting Cam Rising to start. I was expecting Cam Rising to start. So for him to be out, announced before the game, Isaac Wilson comes in. He's going to be the starting quarterback for the Utes. He is the brother of Zach Wilson, for those wondering. And when I heard that news, I feel like it was going to change the course of a game a little bit, more to how the game actually shaked out. Prior to that, I expected, Rising and Alan Bowman to just ball out. They're experienced quarterbacks. They're both seventh-year seniors. Mike Gundy and Kyle Whittingham have both been the coaches of their program for over 20 years, I believe. So I've just been there a lot. And especially in these games at Oklahoma State, I always feel like they're chaotic. There's points being scored left and right. Games are going to overtime. It's sloppy football at times, but it's exciting to watch. And yesterday was sloppy football, but I wouldn't say it was the most exciting game I've ever seen. But nevertheless, it was completely controlled by Utah from start to finish. And if you're a Utah fan and you've been following this Utah team for a while, you understand that this is how you win games. They controlled the clock from start to finish. They pounded the rock. Shout out to Micah Bernard, the Utes running back. He had 182 yards on the ground, and Utah ran for nearly 250 yards as a team. When you're on the road with an inexperienced quarterback, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to manage the clock, you have to control the ground game, and your defense has to be able to stifle their opponent. And that's exactly what they did. I was pretty disappointed with Alan Bowman yesterday. He's a seventh-year senior. He's at home. Now with the 12-team playoff, Oklahoma State is in that hunt for a playoff spot. And he was just brutal yesterday. He ended up getting benched as well. And do I think he's going to be the backup going forward? No, I think Gundy will give him his spot back, and Oklahoma State will probably ultimately be okay. But this performance yesterday, I just wasn't impressed with. I felt like Oklahoma State could have beat Utah. I know the score says it's 22-19. It really wasn't that close. Oklahoma State made a couple plays at the end of that game to make it look more respectable, but really it was Utah start to finish. But this game had Kyle Whittingham written all over it. A lot of times in these sloppy games, people will look at it and just be like, oh, these guys underperformed. It was just a gross game. But if you're the head coach and you're Kyle Whittingham, I think this game probably went exactly how you wanted it to go. Like I mentioned earlier, they controlled the clock. It was an ugly game. It was a defensive battle. They're forcing turnovers and frustration on the Oklahoma State sideline. You could see Ollie Gordon, the star running back for the Cowboys. He was throwing his helmet. He was yelling. He was just so frustrated because this offense couldn't get anything going. And Utah ultimately shut him down. And I think what I've seen with Oklahoma State this year is that when Ollie Gordon can't get going, the offense really feels like they're in a situation where they have to get him the ball. And that kind of bottlenecks their play calling to where the defense knows what they're going to do. Oklahoma State knows what they need to do. And it just forces a game like we saw yesterday where they just can't get any true offense going. And it's tough to see, especially when you have a running back like Ollie Gordon. We want to be able to see him get the ball and make plays. And he just hasn't been able to do that really this year. It's been a pretty slow start for him. I hope we can get him going soon enough, but it'll be interesting to see. But nevertheless, Utah gets out of there with an ugly win. But nevertheless, a win is a win for the Utes. And I do think going forward, this propels them to being a favorite in the Big 12. So we'll see how things go in that conference going forward. We're going to get into red light, green light here, our next segment. You guys love it. I love it. It was a weird week in college football. I talked about that at the beginning of the show. There are some things that I didn't talk about in our 3 big games of the week that I want to get into here. Our first red light of week 4 in college football is going to go to North Carolina. For those of you watching the morning slate yesterday, North Carolina gave up 70 points, 7-0, to James Madison at home. They lost the game 70-50. If you put up 50 points on James Madison and you can't get a win, that's a really bad look to me. I mean, holy. I just was like, this was the weirdest game I've ever seen. I turn on the TV, I'm watching the games in the morning. Nothing was really that impressive that was standing out to me. And every time I look up, North Carolina's either throwing an interception or a touchdown. It felt like, when you play your brother in Madden and every play is either an 80-yard touchdown or a pick six. That's just how this game felt. North Carolina's offense, when you look at it, you say, okay, they put up 50 points, like that's pretty good. But they had a lot of turnovers. It was nasty football. They were fumbling the ball all over the place. They were throwing interceptions. They're just very undisciplined, and that's not something we really expect to see from a Mac Brown coach team. But nevertheless, shout out to James Madison. They walk into Chapel Hill and put a whooping on the Tar Heels, 70-50. My first green light of the week is going to go to Colorado Buffaloes. We talked about it with my guest Caleb Unger a couple weeks ago about how Colorado has a lot of hype about them. They're fun to watch, but they're probably not going to win a ton of big games this year. Last night I definitely wouldn't say it was a big game, but when you look at the grand scheme of things, what a wild finish in Colorado last night. For those of you that didn't watch the game, I'll set the scene for you. Colorado's down a touchdown. There's about 10 to 15 seconds left on the clock. They're at about the 50-yard line. Shedeur Sanders rolls out to his left, throws a bomb to his receiver, who ends up dropping the ball. He's open in the end zone. He gets some separation from the defensive back, bounces right off his chest. 2 seconds left remaining on the clock. Baylor calls a timeout to set their defense up. And this is what I thought was so funny is during this timeout, the broadcast cuts over to a 1994 clip of Colorado, Michigan. I'd never seen this clip before, but for you listeners that are old enough to remember this, Colorado scores on a Hail Mary that got tipped and then caught in the end zone by the Buffs to give them a win over Michigan. And that was in 1994. So sure enough, they cut back to the game. 2 seconds left on the clock. Shedeur, same thing, similar play, rolls left, bombs it down to the end zone, and it's caught for a touchdown. Very similar play. The ball wasn't tipped, but an outstanding catch. There's 4 Baylor defenders just standing there, and 1 Colorado receiver just makes a diving effort to be able to make that play and ultimately send the Buffs into overtime. But the chaos was not done there. Travis Hunter forces a fumble in the end zone that rolls out of the back of the end zone, resulting in a touchback, which gave Colorado the lead. I think the funniest part of this game to me was that when you look at it, they're reviewing the fumble. Colorado had already scored on their first possession of overtime. So if this is truly a fumble, then the game is over, right? The ball rolled out of the back of the end zone. Baylor's probably going to lose the game, but it's not official yet, except for the student storm the field and run over the goalpost, take the goalpost down. Shedeur Sanders is running all over the field with the student. And I saw a lot of flack on social media like, oh, the student should have waited, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? If you're a college student and your team just wins a game like that where you score on a Hail Mary and then a guy's diving for the end zone and your star player, your Heisman candidate, makes a game-winning play like that, storm the field, take down the goalpost, go throw that thing in the river, the lake, go take it up to the mountains, whatever they got there in Colorado. And that was just a really cool thing to see. I understand the frustration of the referees are trying to review it, and they have thousands of students on the field now, and one of the goalposts is over now. Like, if that would have been a touchdown, it would have been a really bad situation. But as a fan of college football and as a college student myself, that was something I loved to see. I thought it was awesome. So shout out for Colorado for getting a crazy win. They get a green light here in week 4. Our second red light is going to go to the Kansas State Wildcats. I talked about it a little bit in that Utah-Oklahoma State game, but just a weird situation. It wasn't something that I was really looking at a lot. And last night, I'm getting ready for bed. I just throw on, one of the late night games. I see that K-State is on, top 15 team going to BYU, and they got smacked by the Cougars. BYU put a beat down on them. And I think when you look at this game, I think it was just a combination of Kansas State not coming to play, and BYU was pumped to have Kansas State at home in a late night game in Provo. BYU just made a lot of big plays. They had a 93-yard muffed punt return They had a lot of touchdowns. Their quarterback was dealing. And Kansas State's offense just looked really slow to me, which is weird because last weekend against Arizona, they looked really good, put up a lot of points in that win over the Wildcats. So to come back from that, I don't know if it was just a slump of, winning a ranked game at home last week, and then you come back and you're playing at 10, 11 o'clock at night in a strange but loud environment that is BYU. And BYU just took it to them. And so if I'm Kansas State, I think this is one of those games where maybe you just not throw the film away, but just try and move on quickly. You still have everything right in front of you. You win out. You have a chance to win your conference and probably still get into the playoff. But not a great showing from the Wildcats. I didn't love what I saw from Avery Johnson, but that's to be expected with the young quarterback. But nevertheless, Kansas State gets a red light this week in week 4. As for the green light, give me Boston College. The Golden Eagles were able to bounce back last night versus Michigan State. It was red bandana night in Boston. That's something that I always really love about college football is the tradition of red bandana night, honoring the people who lost their lives and were true heroes on the acts of 9/11. And so for Boston College to still honor that to this day and wear the uniforms and the custom red bandana numbers and all of that, it's really special. And not only that, but it was a big win. Last week they had a tough loss in Missouri, a game that Eagles fans probably think they had a legit chance to win. I felt like they had a legit chance to win. But nevertheless, they get Michigan State in town. Is Michigan State a great team? Probably not. But nevertheless, to be able to get a win like that, an emotional win on a big play at the end of the game, shout out to Boston College, not only for their win, but for their tradition of honoring the true heroes of our country. My last red light actually came on Friday night. I wanted to talk about this game earlier in the week. I just didn't get a chance to do it. And that was the Nebraska Cornhuskers. They had Illinois coming into town at home. We all know Nebraska had a big win a couple weeks ago when Colorado came to town, but we really wanted to see if they could replicate it in a top 25 matchup to see if this Nebraska team was for real. And ultimately, they just didn't make enough plays to win. They shot themselves in the foot. And this is kind of the Nebraska that we all remember from the last 5 to 10 years where they just don't make enough plays to win the big game. And they're so close, but they just somehow find a way to mess it up. And they found another way to mess it up. Now listen, I know I'm bashing them here. I do think Nebraska's a really good team. I think Dylan Raiola is going to continue to be legit. I think this was just an instance where you see the youth and the inexperience of this team in a primetime game when the big lights are on. I think Matt Rule has his team moving in the right direction. But this game was tough. When you look at it, under 4 minutes to play, I believe, Dylan Raiola misses his wide receiver in the end zone, in which would have been a touchdown late in the game, would have been about 2 or 3 minutes left, would have put them in a great spot to get out of Lincoln with a win. But nevertheless, they have to settle for a field goal, which ends up getting hooked to the left, and they miss, so that keeps the game tied, and they end up losing to Illinois in overtime. I want to give a shout-out to Illinois. I feel like they played a great game of football. They were able to capitalize off Nebraska's mistakes, and sometimes that's what it's all about. It's not about playing the perfect game. It's about being able to capitalize off the mistakes of your opponent. And Illinois was able to do that. And if you're Nebraska going forward, I think you just have to tell yourself that, it's probably a game that you should have won. You didn't. And you have to be able to learn from those mistakes, learn to hit your targets late in the game, how to execute. When you look at the one possession they had in overtime, it ends up being like a 3rd and 42 after a couple penalties and a sack. And to me, that was just the perfect representation of the pressure in the moment getting to them. Illinois had scored on the first possession of OT, so all the pressure was on Nebraska to get in the end zone and take the lead or at least send it to the second overtime. And they just didn't do that. And listen, this Nebraska team is going to be fine. They're going to continue to grow. I think we'll see them finish the year in the top 25. I think they have some meaningful games in their schedule for the rest of the year. And so this team is going to continue to grow, but this week they are going to get a red light just because it felt like they had this game in their hands. They had Illinois on the ropes at home. And they just weren't able to get it done. So Nebraska gets a red light. We'll get into our final green light here. And this green light is a little unique in the sense that it's not a team, it's not a player, but it's actually Caleb Unger and I's assessment of the Michigan quarterback room. For those of you that listened to the episode a couple weeks ago, you probably heard Caleb and I talk about what this Michigan team is. They had just come off a beatdown from Texas at home in Ann Arbor, and they just looked like a mess. Davis Warren couldn't complete a pass to save his life. The run game was pretty stagnant. They couldn't get anything going, and Texas threw the ball all over the yard in the big house. And so when we were talking about that, we both said, listen, it looks like Alex Orji should probably be the starter. Can he throw the ball deep downfield? Can he make long throws that can continue drives? No. But neither can Davis Warren, and at least Orji has the legs to extend plays, and he adds himself as another threat in that Michigan run game. And then when you look at yesterday, that's pretty much exactly how it played out. Was Orji making plays with his arms? Absolutely not. Was the second half stagnant for their offense? Yes. But they found a way to win, and they made just enough plays to beat USC at home. And that's a big game. USC is a really good team. Expect them to be in the hunt for a Big Ten championship game. And so for Orji to be the starter and get a win like that, I think means a lot. I think that really boosts his confidence. And I saw him at the end of the game. He had tears running down his face. He was pretty emotional. And in the interview, he just said, it's all glory to God for this position. And that's just something I love to see in college football. We get so caught up in, this guy's not good enough. They got to move on to the next quarterback. Like, this team sucks, whatever it is. And sometimes we have to take the time to realize that these are 18 to 22-year-old kids that are just trying to live out their dream and play the sport they love for as long as they can. And was Alex Orji perfect yesterday? No. But he didn't need to be. His team won the game. He made plays. He was strong in the run game. He commanded the offense. I think he's a leader in that locker room, which is something that goes under the radar a lot of times when quarterbacks underperform. His teammates look up to him. His teammates enjoy being around him. And so for Michigan to get that win and for Alex Orji to be the starter after all the weird stuff that this Michigan offense has gone through this year was really cool to see. And Caleb and I talked about that a couple weeks ago, and I had a chance to talk to him a little bit yesterday, and we were like, yeah, we called that. So shout out to us for assessing the Michigan quarterback room correctly, and it looks like Orji will probably be the starter going forward. So good for him. That is going to wrap it up for our college football segment of this week. Before we get you guys out of here, I want to talk about some Week 3 primetime picks in the NFL this week. Thursday night happened a couple days ago as the Jets put a beat down on the Patriots. I don't want to talk about that game. I'm just going to go ahead and move on from that one. Sunday night, we got the Chiefs, the Falcons. The Chiefs come in at 2-0. Falcons are 1-1. Had a big win Monday night last week against the Eagles in Philadelphia. Really strange game. Felt like the Eagles probably should have won that one. They didn't. So both teams coming off close wins. The Chiefs had a close one at home yet last week against the Bengals. The Chiefs have looked good, but not great yet. I feel like we see that a lot with them, where weeks 1 through 5, they look a little rocky. Maybe they drop a game or two. And then by about week 9 or 10, they're like, yeah, they're back. The Falcons are still trying to find the rhythm with Kirk Cousins. I think that they can make some noise in their division this year. The NFC South is weird. The Bucks, I know, are probably the favorite, but now the Saints are putting up 45 points a game on teams. So I think the Falcons are going to give the Chiefs a little bit of trouble, but ultimately I'm going to take the Chiefs in convincing fashion. I know this game's in Atlanta. It's a big night for Falcons fans. Arthur Blank is getting introduced into the Mercedes-Benz Stadium Hall of Fame, and I think they're doing like free hot dogs and like potato chips, which is awesome if you're a fan. Like, you don't have to go spend $80 on snacks for the game. So it'll be a fun environment. I think it'll be loud in that dome in Atlanta, but I think the Chiefs are going to take this one pretty convincingly. Monday night, we have a doubleheader. The first one, Jaguars at Bills, followed by the Commanders at Bengals. We'll get into the first one. The Jags take a flight up from warm Florida up to freezing cold Buffalo. It's probably not that cold in Buffalo yet, but nevertheless, not how I want to spend my Sunday or Monday in September. But the Jaguars, for whatever reason, just haven't looked great this year. I don't know if it's the coaching or the scheme or whatnot, but Trevor Lawrence is a really good quarterback, and it feels like his years are just getting wasted. They have good weapons around them. They have Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis. Trevor Etienne, in my opinion, is a really good running back. The defense has been pretty solid as well. They haven't given up a ton of points, and somehow they find themselves 0-2, in a division that's not necessarily great. I mean, yes, the Texans are probably the favorite, but I feel like that second place spot is pretty up for grabs between the Jags and not the Titans, but it's just a really weird competitive division, and I think they could find themselves in a wild card spot if they figure it out, and they just haven't been able to do that. Doug Peterson might be on borrowed time if this continues to keep up for the Jags, and they're in a weird spot right now. However, I do think they're going to play Buffalo tough. Buffalo's offense does seem to be clicking right now. I think that they're on a mission this year, especially the last couple seasons being pretty disappointing, coming up short of making both the AFC Championship and the Super Bowl. in games that Buffalo fans probably think that they should have won, and I have to agree with them. But Buffalo's offense looks to be on fire right now. The Jags look to have a little bit of turmoil early in the season, which isn't great. So give me the Buffs by double digits here on Monday Night Football in the first game. I think I said give me the Buffs, give me the Bills. The same thing. It's the same animal. Monday night, the second game, we got the Commanders at the Bengals. Really interesting game. We have a face-off between two Heisman-winning quarterbacks from LSU. When you look at Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow, both their stories are pretty similar. They both come transferring from LSU, different colleges. Daniels from Arizona State, Burrow from Ohio State. Coming to LSU, turned the program around. Burrow probably had a little bit more team success as they won the national championship. Probably one of the most dominant teams in the history of college football. But Jaden Daniels was no joke. Obviously, winning the Heisman isn't something they just hand out. So nevertheless, we get to see these two face off on Monday night. Weird start for both these teams. The Commanders picked up a win last week against the Giants, which, woo-hoo, you beat the Giants. I don't think that's something to wave your flag about. But nevertheless, a win as a rookie quarterback is something that's a big deal. That helps you get your confidence. That helps you find your rhythm with your receivers and your running backs, and it just brings the locker room closer together, and ultimately, that's what your first year is all about as a rookie. The Bengals, they're 0-2 again. I feel like with this Bengal team, week 1 through 4 is always just terrible. We're like, where's Joe Burrow? What is Jamar Chase doing? Like, is this team going to win a game this season? And then all of a sudden, they're like winning their division, or they're at least in the hunt for a wild card spot. But they find themselves 0-2. We talked about the game with the Chiefs a little bit. They got completely shafted last weekend. That was a terrible pass interference call against Kansas City. But it's what you expect when you play the Chiefs. I don't say that, I wouldn't necessarily say that the referees are rigging the game for the Chiefs, but it's a pretty bad call, and it's not the first time I've seen it happen in Kansas City, especially against the Bengals. Shout out my brother. I know he's going to listen to this, and he's not going to be happy about it. But I think the Bengals are going to get back on track this game. The Commanders are a young team. They're inexperienced. I like the direction of which they're going, but I think the Bengals are really talented. I think after these first 2 weeks, losing games that they both probably feel like they should have won, I think you're going to see a fire get lit under this Cincinnati team. I think they're going to go on a tear here in the middle of the season. And if they don't, I think we could definitely see things change up. In terms of roster, Jamar Chase hasn't been happy. T. Higgins is on a franchise tag. But I think this Bengals team is angry. I think they're hungry for a win. I think we're going to see them beat the Commanders in a relatively close game. But nevertheless, Cincinnati picks it up at home. That is pretty much going to do it here for our episode of Chop It Up. I want to thank you guys for listening. Before I let you guys go, I want to plug a little work that I've been doing behind the scenes. I've been working with Locked On Huskies, which for those of you that don't know, it's a podcast that talks about the University of Washington football. I understand that a lot of my audience is probably Duck fans, but who cares? I've been working with these guys. I had a chance to go work up with them in Seattle this summer during UW's fall training camp, and they're great guys, Roman Tomashoff and Lars Hansen. Be sure to go check them out on social media. I've been running the Locked On Huskies Instagram and TikTok accounts. We're starting to get that up and ramp that account up and get them some more attention and awareness as well. Be sure to go check them out. They do a lot of good stuff. They love talking college football. Even if it's not the Huskies, if you're just a Big Ten fan or a West Coast football fan, they make a lot of great content, and it's been awesome to be working with them. So be sure to go give them a look, follow, subscribe, go watch a video, whatever it may be. We would truly appreciate it. And then here at Chop It Up, I've been putting in some work on myself. I'm a college student. I'm an athlete. I'm also a student, student, athlete, athlete, student. Really depends on how you look at that one. Just kidding. But nevertheless, I put out video once a week, get some clips up throughout the week, make some predictions. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram. So be sure to go check us out. We're on YouTube, Spotify for the full episodes. And I just want to thank our audience for listening. Be sure to go tell your friends about it, your family, anyone that watches sports. DM me, email me, whatever it is. I would love to hear topics you guys want to hear me talk about. And let's just keep this thing going. I feel like we're doing a good job and we're building some momentum. So let's keep getting after it here and we'll keep chopping it up. So that is going to do it for episode 6, I believe. So thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.